What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the breakdowns of the fantasy football relevancy. Today we are focusing on the Arizona Cardinals of Arizona. We have our starting out with their quarterback Kyler Murray, the first overall pick in last year's draft. He had a pretty solid first year. My projections on him close to 3,800 yards. I got him about 3,790, 26 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 575 yards rushing on the ground with 5 touchdowns there. Giving him a total of 375 fantasy points, which is he's in the top half for me. He's not quite number one, two, or three, but if I sorted this, I think it's about 8 or 9 for me. So just overall, I think he's going to have a really good second year. Um, I've mentioned it in other shows about how Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson came out in their second year and put up MVP seasons. I mean, those numbers, 26 touchdowns, or what did I say? Yeah, 26 touchdowns, I don't think is going to be enough to win an MVP, but he's definitely going to have a really good year two in the league here.
Yeah, and if I had coffee, I would spit it out right now because 3,700 yards is ludicrous. Come on, he had that in his rookie season. I think he's gonna have a huge improvement this year. This is a very high volume offense. They like to spread the ball around, which favors Kyler Murray. Has a ton of upside rushing the ball. He's probably gonna sit right around between 5 to 600 yards throughout the course of his career. And he's just really underrated. I think people look at Kyler Murray as a quarterback that just runs the ball. And I mean, when you watch him throw, his release is very quick and it's very impressive. He can make any throw at any angle. It reminds me a lot of Russell Wilson, and I think it has to do a lot with their baseball backgrounds because that's what you do in baseball, different arm angles, and I see that a lot in their quarterback style. So I love Kyler Murray this season. I already said in another episode that I think he can be the number one overall fantasy QB this year. I have him third on my board, but I had him for 4,400 yards and 35 touchdowns this season. I think he can put up big numbers. He's got more weapons now with DeAndre Hopkins. Their offensive line looks like it's going to be slightly improved, a better defense. So I think, and not to mention, it was Cliff Kingsbury's first year in the NFL. And if you watched any Cardinals games in the beginning of last season, I mean, it was a bumpy road. Cliff Kingsbury looked absolutely lost as a head coach. And then it took, maybe 6 weeks, I'd say, before they really started to find their groove. So given a full season, I think they can put that offense together and run it really effectively.
Yep, and then behind him, looking at guys like Brett Hundley, Drew Anderson. If Kyler Murray goes down, then pretty much their whole season is shot. They're going to be relying a lot on Kenyon Drake, and hopefully one of these quarterbacks can get it to your receivers if you ended up drafting them. But nobody that I would really put my hands on in any fantasy leagues. Speaking of their running backs, they got a trio here, which all could be
Hmm.
relevant in some way, one way or another, long term, short term. Kenyon Drake is their short term guy. He came over from Miami last year in a trade. David Johnson is now gone. He's gone off to Houston in a blockbuster deal that happened earlier this summer. Kenyon Drake, and then they got Chase Edmonds, who's still there from 2018. He was their fourth round pick, and they drafted Benjamin in the last round of this year, the 2020 draft. So if Drake goes down, I'm very comfortable having one of his handcuffs in Edmonds or Benjamin. Drake is going. He's going in the early to mid second round in a lot of drafts that I've been in, a lot of mock drafts that I've been in. So good value for him there. He had an excellent second half of the season last year, and I'm sure you'll talk a little bit about that. But let's get your thoughts on these three running backs that they got.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Kenyon Drake had a huge second half last year, and it's been, that's why there's so much hype surrounding him. 800 yards and 8 touchdowns in 8 games. So, I mean, that's a huge season if he was able to repeat those numbers over the course of 16 games. I've always liked Kenyon Drake. I thought that he was in a really crappy situation in Miami, and he finally got the opportunity that, a lot of people were hoping he would get, and he really took advantage. He's still playing for a big contract. I think that also factors in a little bit. They only gave him a transition tag, so he's going to hit free agency again next season. So a lot to play for. You know, I'm a little worried about the hype. I've seen him sneak into the first round now, and I'm not quite as comfortable there. I mean, I think
Mhm.
he has the potential to finish as a top 10 back. I have him ranked 12th in my ranking, so still a RB1, but more of a back end. He has potential to be even higher, but they like to spread the ball around here. I think Chase Edmonds and Eno Benjamin are going to be involved. They're two talented backs. I mean, Chase Edmonds started a few games last season and went over 100 scrimmage yards, and I watched him. He's very explosive. I think he could have a role as a third down back, catching some passes out of the backfield, and I think everybody was really surprised to see Eno Benjamin slip that far in the draft. I haven't really seen any reports as to why. I don't know if there's a secret injury history there or he spit on a scout's face. I'm not sure what it is there, but these are three really talented backs, and I think that's something that caps Kenyon Drake's upside more than people realize because the whole point of the air raid offense is to spread the ball around and have lots of weapons. And Cliff Kingsbury doesn't want defenses solely focusing in on Kenyon Drake. He wants to be able to hand it off to Drake, pass to Edmonds, hand off to Eno, pass to Hopkins, Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald. You know, they have a lot of options, and that's what this offense is all about. So I think Edmonds and Eno are going to be more involved than people think.
All right, and real quick before we get to their wide receivers, there, as you already mentioned, you touched on it a little bit, their offensive line. Not a lot of changes have been made, but on
No.
paper, between just from like last year, they had the same names on paper, but some of them missed because of injury and they didn't gel together. But between 2018 and now, this line is just completely revamped
Yeah.
with a lot of guys that I mean, even just a casual NFL fan have heard of: DJ Humphries, Justin Pugh, J.R. Sweezy, Marcus Gilbert, who they got over in a trade from Pittsburgh last offseason. If all five of these guys, and Mason Cole's their center, if all five of these guys are on the field together and they build that chemistry, this could end up being one of the better offensive lines in the leagues and opening holes for Kenyon Drake and keeping Kyler Murray upright.
Yep, I think they have top 10 upside. I would agree with that.
All right, so moving on to their wide receivers, they got a lot of them. They took three of them just in the draft last year, and then they signed a bunch of undrafted free agents. But your top three are Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins, and Christian Kirk. Andy Isabella and Keyshawn Johnson were some guys that saw the field a little bit last year. Hakeem Butler is a guy that I really like, and Jordan, you know exactly why. Um, so I mean that's six guys right there. Not all of them are going to be fantasy relevant. I mean, it's really hard to even say who should you stash, who should you draft if at all. I mean, Fitzgerald, it's probably his last year, but he's been saying that for the past 2 years. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be there for a little bit, and Christian Kirk is kind of the next guy in line to kind of take over um, Larry Fitzgerald's spots. So that really only leaves like one or two spots open. And I mean, it's the offense is so deep, they're going to put up a lot of points. But it's who's it going to be on a weekly basis that you can trust as far as getting you fantasy points for your fantasy team. As an Arizona Cardinals fan, well, I'm not an Arizona Cardinals fan, but if you were an Arizona Cardinals fan, you'd be very excited about watching this team play. But as a fantasy football player, it's DeAndre Hopkins, it's Kenyon Drake, it's a little bit of Christian Kirk, and then I mean, are you touching any of these other three guys, and then touch on the main three guys?
Yeah, I mean, I already mentioned before that this offense is all about spreading the ball around. So I'm not drafting Andy Isabella, Hakeem Butler, Keyshawn Johnson. Let's see who else they have on here. Trent Sherfield, AJ Richardson. I'm not touching any of these guys. And I mean, honestly, I don't know if I draft Larry Fitzgerald either. And maybe I'm disrespecting one of the best wide receivers to play this game, but I look for upside. Larry Fitzgerald's going late in drafts. Don't get me wrong; he's going to put up numbers. He's not going to drop any passes this season. He'll probably have around 800 yards. That's where he's kind of sat the last two seasons as they've changed their offense and changed the entire organizational philosophy. But I probably wouldn't even touch Larry Fitzgerald. Honestly, I'd rather take a young upside guy late in the draft. But if you're looking for a safe guy that's gonna Larry Fitzgerald will get his receptions. He'll have some targets. He's safe. In terms of DeAndre Hopkins, let's talk about DeAndre Hopkins for a second. A lot of people have him as a top 5 wide receiver, and I just can't see him doing that in this offense. He's been a guy that's had over 150 targets consistently in his career because he has been the man. early in his career he had Andre Johnson, so he didn't quite touch those numbers. But ever since Andre Johnson has moved on and retired, I mean, he's been the man. He's had 145, 150 targets consistently for the past 3 seasons. And in this offense, I just can't see it happening. I have him projected out at 135 targets. So that's 15 less. I still think that's honestly pretty reasonable, and I think it's a little high. And that's just because I respect his talent. If you're talking about talent, I have him as a top 5 wide receiver, no doubt. But in this offense, I can't see it. I think his volume's going to dip. And I do like Christian Kirk. I'll mention Christian Kirk next. He'll have over 100. He had over 100 targets last season, and I think he'll continue to improve. He missed a few games and still had over 100 targets, so I think he's a great candidate to move up draft boards. He's currently going around wide receiver 33, depending where you look and depending what kind of format you play in. But most PPR leagues, he's going in the early 30s. I like his upside there. I think this is going to be a high volume passing offense. Doesn't have all the pressure on him. There's going to be a lot of eyes on DeAndre Hopkins when he's on the field. So I think that's going to leave a lot of open opportunities for Christian Kirk.
Yeah, this offense is absolutely loaded. If there is a weak point on this offense besides chemistry, besides Kyler Murray only going into his second year, it's probably the tight end position.
Yeah. I'd
Uh,
say it's their fullback.
with yeah, Parker Houston, with Max Williams, who has he's a higher round pick, isn't he? First round, second round pick from
I
Baltimore.
think he was, yeah, it was with Baltimore. I want to say it was in the second round. Yeah,
So I mean, he was
second
drafted
round.
out
Yeah.
of college with some potential. Ended up coming over to the Cardinals here. I mean, they really haven't notoriously used the tight end a lot in any way. Charles Clay was there for the past 2 or 3 years, and he hasn't done anything. Haven't had a lot of good luck with tight ends, but I mean, one of them's going to be on the field. There's no doubt about that, unless they're just running with five
Yeah.
offensive linemen and four wide receivers. But Max Williams, he might have a little bit of value, especially with the ball being spread around a lot. And you've mentioned it many times how this tight ends for just in fantasy is really deep. Do you have the numbers in front of you on where he's going, if he's even being drafted at all?
Yeah, I mean he's like in the late 20s, early 30s, so one of the last tight ends in the league off the board. And I mean, to me, it makes a lot of sense. And as much promise as he had as a second round pick, this offense really doesn't use the tight end. So there's not really any format in which I touch Max Williams. And I mean, you mentioned it. It seems silly, but yeah, I mean, I think they will primarily run four wide receiver sets. We talked about all the depth that they have. There's no reason they couldn't have their top three and then rotate through those other guys in terms of who's on the field, or maybe throw Chase Edmonds on the field, split him out wide, split Kenyon Drake out wide, if lots of 4 and 5 wide receiver sets. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I think that's actually how this offense functions and how it's meant to function. So I can't think of a situation in which I touch Max Williams.
All right. And then going on to their special teams, you got Zane Gonzalez, who's their kicker. I think he gets a boost just with the offense alone.
Yeah.
They're gonna move the ball. They play down in the NFC West where there's a lot of warm weather down there. He's
Hmm.
in Arizona, so it gets hot down there. So not a lot of bad games, not a lot of bad weather games down there. Their division rival, LA, the Rams, they have a new stadium, dome stadium. It's either going to be nice weather or it's going to be closed. The Who else is in the division? San Francisco has a newer stadium, but I think that's open air.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he's just based on the offense alone. Zane Gonzalez, I think, he's a good draft pick.
Yeah, I mean, I had Zane Gonzalez in quite a few leagues last year. Very under the radar. He was the fifth highest scoring kicker last year. I don't think a lot of people realize that, but this is a very high volume, high octane offense, and that was only year one. And I think a lot of people are kind of sweeping that under the rug. This offense is going to continue to improve. Cliff Kingsbury was a rookie. Kyler Murray was a rookie. This was a whole new system in the NFL. So I think they're going to continue to improve. You already mentioned some favorable matchups, favorable weather. And I like Zane Gonzalez. He's currently going around kicker 15. I did look at his ADP because I know a lot of people don't know that name. So I think he offers a lot of value, and I definitely have him as a top 5 kicker this year.
Yeah, I can see it. Going into their defense as a whole, their defensive special teams, they're very underrated. They got a lot of higher picks on this team between second and first round picks as far as talent goes. Their first round pick this past year, Isaiah Simmons, is probably going to be one of their top IDPs. Outside of Buda Baker, who just gets a ton of tackles. You got Byron Murphy and Patrick Peterson as a good cornerback pairing, but it's again, I feel like it's Groundhog Day. I keep on repeating myself in different episodes, and if you've paid attention for all the episodes that we've done, I keep on saying the same thing. If you got a top cornerback, you're not getting fantasy points, or you're getting very limited fantasy points because they're not getting thrown in that direction. So Patrick Peterson, I mean, he's not what he used to be, but he is still a good cornerback. Byron Murphy is another good cornerback. He was their second round pick last year in 2019. So if you need to play a corner, those two guys are very viable. Buda Baker in the safety position is one of the better IDPs that they have, just because with the safeties, at least they have a better chance of getting tackles. But Isaiah Simmons for me, and Chandler Jones, he gets to the quarterback a lot. He's a sack machine. But Isaiah Simmons, because I like to go young, I think is the top guy for me.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I really like doing this team mini series where we're breaking down each roster is, I like diving into the defense a little bit. Obviously it's going to be super relevant when it comes time to evaluate where teams are going to finish in the standings. But, and if you're watching this, you're a diehard because, I mean, not many people want to talk about the Cardinals defense. So I really like it because the more that I look at this defense, there's a lot of potential here. I mean, a lot of potential. Their defensive front, they run a 3-4 primarily with Vance Joseph there, who came over from the Broncos. They have Jordan Phillips, Corey Peters, Zach Allen as their 3 guys up front. Jordan Phillips is a solid run-stopping nose tackle, but other 2 guys, nothing to write home about. But I could argue that they have the best linebacking core in the NFL, just from 1 through 4 here. And it's really underrated, though, and there's a lot of IDP relevance here. Isaiah Simmons is going to play all over the field as safety. Well, they actually came out and said they want him to primarily play linebacker, but I think that's just coach speak. I mean, with his talent, you have to move him around. He has incredible ability. Chandler Jones, who I will shout out because he's from my hometown, so 607. Chandler Jones, but he's very underrated. I mean, he's one of the premier sack masters in the NFL. Nobody really talks about him ever. And he was on the Patriots, so it's not even like he was on a small market team that never did anything, but he every season puts up 10 plus sacks. And he's had several years over 15, so he tends to slip in drafts. And he's a guy, I believe on Sleeper right now, he has dual eligibility at defensive line, which gives him a lot of value. In terms of their other linebackers, Devondre Campbell came over from the Falcons. He had 129 tackles last season. He's on a 1-year prove-it deal, which I find very strange because he had such a nice season last year. But he said he loved what the Cardinals were doing in an interview, and he really wanted to be a part of it, which is kind of interesting, and I don't think I've ever heard that before. Jordan Hicks last season was 3rd in the league in tackles. I mean, I don't think most people even know who Jordan Hicks is, and the guy was 3rd in the league in tackles. So he's a guy that could slip in IDP drafts, and I'd definitely be targeting him. Buda Baker, same thing. He's one of the top safeties off the board. He had 147 tackles last year and led the entire NFL in solo tackles specifically. So a lot of interesting names. And, when I think about the Cardinals, I never think, oh, man, they have a great defense. But, man, those linebackers really have me intrigued. And Patrick Peterson's a top 10 corner. Byron Murphy was much improved. So I think they're a really interesting unit to keep an eye on.
I mean, if you could get that dual eligibility from Isaiah Simmons and from, damn it, I just lost his name, Chandler Jones, play Chandler Jones on the defensive line, Isaiah Simmons as your defensive back, and go out and get a 160 tackle linebacker. I mean, that's league winning right there.
Hmm.
Your final thoughts for the Cardinals? I actually have them, and I have them as a sleeper to make the playoffs. And this is more shocking than when I talked about the Lions, because the NFC representative for the Super Bowl last year was the San Francisco 49ers, who's in the same division. I actually have the 49ers taking a little bit of a step back. I got Seattle winning the division and Arizona coming in second and making the wild card, with San Francisco finishing third and the Rams getting demoted to the XFL.
Oh, they
um,
should be.
but yeah, I mean, I could see them with like a 10-6, 9-7 is a little rough because the NFC is very very tough. But 10-6 with the Cardinals and making the seventh wild card spot.
Yeah, so I think this is a really big year for Cliff Kingsbury. I think they have a lot of talent on this team, and I think this is the year where he needs to. A lot of people thought that was an insane hire, and as of right now, I still question it. I mean, he doesn't have a ton of
But
experience,
he's got a
so
very nice house.
I mean, that's all that matters. I mean, I would live there. Maybe I am right now. You don't know, but I. This is a big year for him. There's a lot of talent. I think they really need to perform well in the next 2 years here for him to really prove that he's a solid head coach. Because I mentioned it before, I think head coach is very important. But I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but I think that based on, and I wouldn't have said this before I did this analysis of the roster. I mean, I think the Cardinals can win the division, and that's even crazier than what you just said. I have the Rams in last place. I think they're the least talented team in the division, and I'm a Rams fan, so it's they'll probably be right around 8-8. I just think they're a very mediocre team, and more speaks to the talent and for the other teams in this division. But yeah, I mean, I agree. The 49ers defense is one of the best in the league, but I'm not a fan of that offense. I'm not a fan of Jimmy G. I don't think he's the kind of guy that can take them to a Super Bowl. I think they'd have a better chance of winning the Super Bowl with Tyrod rather than Jimmy G, just based on his playing style. I think they need that conservative quarterback and let their defense win them games. The Seahawks, you can't count them out because of Pete Carroll, but man, based on the Cardinals' talent on offense and defense, they're still very young, so I'd be a little surprised if they won the division this year, but I think you give them a wild card spot this year and they'll win the division the year after.
It's going to be a fun division to watch. I think this might be my second favorite division after the NFC South, as far as like just the games in the division. But it's going to be fun to watch.